Every Night is Game Night, episode 43, Themes That Raise Issues, part 2. Hey everybody, welcome back to Every Night is Game Night. This is episode 43. This is Anthony once again with Jason.
Yo, my peoples, what's up?
All right, guys, so we are back with part 2 of our Themes That Raise Issues. Once again with us, we have Dr. Patrick Rael. Thanks again for coming back.
Thanks for having me here.
All right, guys, so this week we're going to be talking about some additional difficult themes in games, but from a different perspective, right, Jason?
Yeah, this is going to be, so we did America in the first episode. So freedom and Comanche were both from American perspective. And in American history, like colonialism and slavery are very entrenched parts of that. This time we're going to go across the pond to some of our EU friends. We are going to talk about Churchill by GMT, and we're going to talk about Black Orchestra by Game Salute. Both of these games are set in and around the World War II theater, which involves Nazis. So Nazis is definitely a difficult theme, a difficult thing to grapple with the games. And Dr. Rael has blogged about it, so we definitely wanted to have him on for this part of the discussion as well. So thank you, Dr. Rael, for coming back.
Thank you.
All right. So how we're going to do this episode, it's going to be the same structure as last time, where we're going to talk about these two games as games. So it's a little bit of an unnatural distinction, especially for me because I'm a big theme guy. But I think that I want to be respectful of people who just they don't want this as part of their gaming discussion. They don't want to talk about these themes, or for whatever reason they don't want to enter into that space. That's cool. So we want to give the people what they want. We want to give you games. These are two games that, spoiler, I think they're both kind of good in their own ways. So I think they deserve to be shared among everybody. And then if you are into the conversation, if you really enjoyed the last episode, you want to hear more about, this very difficult theme of Nazis in games, then after we talk about those games, that's where the conversation will happen. So Anthony, please lead us off with Churchill.
Okay, so Churchill, the 2015 Golden Geek for Best War Game, is not really about the war part of the war. It's more about the politics of the conferences between Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt between 43 and 45. So the game takes place over the course of several rounds, conferences, and you can, similar to Comanche, which we talked about last week, you can choose how many you want to do. So the tutorial is just 3 conferences. It's the last 3, so it takes place after D-Day. It's the end of the war. There's a tournament, which is 5 conferences, which includes D-Day, and then there's a full campaign, which is all 10 conferences, and is a much longer game, about 5 to 6 hours long. And when you set up the board, it looks like it's going to be a war game. You have a map, you have the different fronts, you have all these different countries and colonies involved in the war, and it looks like you'll be struggling for control, and you will to some degree, but the game is really about the conference. And so that's the left side of the board. And the way that plays out is every conference you're going to have 7 cards. You draw it from a deck of 21, and each of these cards represents a historical figure from the UK, the US, or the USSR. And you'll be using these cards for a variety of different things within the conference, but it's fairly straightforward how this plays out. So everybody plays 1 card blind. That's your bid for the agenda phase. The winner gets one of the different issue icons for free into their track, and then everybody will take turns selecting 2 more issues to put on the table, and that's the agenda for this conference. And the issues can be a lot of different things. There's global issues, political military issues, materials production, directed offensives, the A-bomb is in there. And these are the only items that'll be directly affected for this particular conference, the 7 that you select this way. Once they're selected, everybody's going to take turns in player order and play cards. And when you play a card, it's going to have a numerical value on it, plus usually it's some kind of special ability, and that'll allow you to move one of these issues onto your track. At the end of the conference, anything that's on your track, you quote-unquote win, and if you get the most issues won, you win the conference, which is worth victory points. When you do this, when you play a card and pull an issue, somebody can debate you, and if they debate you, they can play a card and basically pull it back. So you have to be careful, make sure that you're not giving people openings to kind of swipe stuff from you. But it's a very interesting back and forth. You're never really sure what's going to land where, who wants which issue. Another really cool part of this is that your leader cards can be played at any time, and they're worth 7, so they're the highest values. But if you play your leader card, there are weaknesses on all 3. So you're going to roll dice when you do this, and there's a chance that Churchill will have a heart attack and be unavailable in the next conference. There's a chance that FDR will die and get replaced by Truman, who's not as good as a card. He's not very strong unless the A-bomb has been built. And then there's Stalin, who can get paranoid on his roll, and it makes all of the cards in your hand weaker for the rest of the conference. So you have to be careful when you play the leader. There's not a significant chance of this happening. I think for one of them, you roll 1 die, it can be a 1 or a 2, and for the rest, it's you roll 2 dice, and it's like a 2 to a 4. So the chances are not huge, but they're there, so you have to be careful. Once you've done all this and broken everything up, you'll go to the decision stage. You'll separate everything out, determine who gets offensive support, who's going to get political alignment markers, clandestine markers, and all that. And then the war phase. So at the very, very end of the conference is the actual war part of this war game. And this is where you assign political alignment markers, clandestine markers, basically representing how the different countries and colonies are aligned and what kind of influence you've placed on them, as well as where your spy networks have grown. And then finally, you'll move the front and roll your dice and see if you move closer to defeating Germany and Japan. So the end of the game happens when either both Germany and Japan have surrendered, or you've gotten to the end of the 10th conference. And then you count up victory points based on all sorts of stuff. There's points based on who won conferences, who was there when those countries were defeated, so which fronts were in those countries. The A-bomb positioning. The U.S. doesn't actually get a ton of points for the A-bomb. The USSR can get a lot of points if their spy network follows the U.S. along. They can get upwards of 12 or 15 points from that track. And in general, the USSR has a much harder time scoring in this game, but they get more points when they do things for a lot of things. So if they win a conference, they get more points. The A-bomb, they get more points on that track. If they get close to Japan, they get more points there as well. So lots of different things that they get rewarded for, but it's harder for them to do it. So overall thoughts of the game. For me, it's a fantastic tug of war. And the unique scoring mechanisms make it a pretty fun gaming experience. And it's not really like a war game. It's definitely more of a political game built around the war. It's seeing the different sides of things. And yet it's still epic in scope. You're still playing through those last 2 years of World War II, but you're digging much, much deeper into the very intricate, tenuous alliance between these 3 people. And, you know, the way the different people on either side interact, the different cards you pull out, the weaknesses that they have, the fragility, the fact that they can fail at any time. You have, FDR dies basically. He does die every game just based on the conference cards. If he's still alive by the end of the game, usually he dies and is replaced by Truman. It's very, very interesting. And it's not, you have to keep it close. You can't just run away with it in terms of scoring, because if you win by more than, I think, 15 or 20 points, then there's this roll-off that happens, and it's possible that you then lose. So you need to keep it close. You don't want other people to think that you're running away with things, because historically speaking, that wouldn't have been very good. You want to make sure that everybody's kind of on equal footing. It's this balance of power, and there was a struggle between these 3 countries. So it's overall, in general, it's just a really fantastic way of approaching World War II in a board game. It's not like any other game I've played. From a solo perspective, not as good. It does require bots. You have to do bots for both of them. The bots are not as cleanly designed as like the coin series bots, so there's a lot of things that are kind of left up to you. A lot of things say do this randomly. Okay, how? So there's a lot of different things happening there that can be unique to the game, but the solo bots, it takes longer because you have to go through the spreadsheet for both the other characters you're using. You don't have the kind of the back and forth elements of it. There is a little bit of deal making that can happen in this game with 3 live opponents. So playing it solo, you can't really make a deal with the bot. And the bots are decently difficult despite all that, even though you have this funny spreadsheet that you're running through. So it is a little difficult to kind of wrap your head around what it's trying to do and how it's doing it, especially because it's not as finely tuned as some of the other ones. It's not necessarily bad, though. I still enjoyed it. I just wish it was a little bit quicker, a little bit cleaner. Things can still get a little bit random because of die rolls. There's a lot of die rolls here, but that's not super different than any other war game. And so, yeah, I'd say overall, Churchill is a very, very good game. It's worth playing, especially if you have a group of 3 people. Even if you just have 2 and you have to play bot with 1, I think that would be fine. Solo-wise, again, if you are a war gamer, you probably wouldn't have a problem with this. If you played Coin before at solo, then it probably wouldn't have a huge problem because it's the same idea you're running through, decision charts and processes and procedures. But overall, yeah, it's fantastic. I had a lot of fun with it.
Cool. All right. It's weird because it seems like, and I guess a lot of war games do this, but like World War II was like a really fraught time morally, right? And I know that they kind of abstract the Nazis and the Japanese, and it's just kind of this enemy, lurking in the background, and while you're doing the negotiation thing on the 3 ally sides. But even then, like Stalin's doing stuff. And I think of a game like Twilight Struggle where they managed to get that Cold War thing, but the cards had all sorts of information about like what was going on and everything. Did you find in this game that there was, grappling with that, or does it really kind of stay high level?
Yeah, I mean, you have the 21 cards for each side, that each of those is an individual that was involved in the war, the things that happened to them. The people who died during the war can die, like the cards can die based on certain die rolls, and there's a lot of different depths to it in different ways. I wouldn't say it's as deep as like say Twilight Struggle in terms of like flavor text and the amount of information that's there about the Cold War, but there's a lot there to glean and a lot of things that you kind of just want to look up and learn more about. So it's definitely, it went deeper than at least I had personally into the history of these things.
Right. Mm-hmm. All right, so you give it a pretty solid recommendation, at least for 3 players, and then solo if you're really into that. Basically, if you're really into that if that sounds great to you, go for it. If it only sounds good to you, then it might be something to think twice about.
It's a big, long, decently expensive game to pick up for only solo. So yeah, hopefully you have 3 people for it, and then you can play solo to learn it or kind of run through the whole thing.
Got it. Okay, cool. So let's get into the next game, which is Black Orchestra. So this one, really, I kind of got Churchill in here. It's a really good game to get out there. But this is the game, and another game we're going to talk about after the jump, where we really talk about the difficult issues that are raised with having that Nazi presence in games. So Black Orchestra, designed by Philip Dubarry, as I said before, published by Game Salute. This was a 2016 game. This is a cooperative game. Surprise! Anthony plays the big, heavy game. Jason comes in with the cooperative thematic game. So you can play this as a solo, but you play it two-handed, which isn't ideal, but I think it works. At least it's not 3-handed. It's pretty easy to manage. So in this game, you play a team of famous German noteworthies. The reason why they're famous was because they were part of a real life historical conspiracy to assassinate Hitler as he was rising to power. That sounds really crazy because Hitler was not assassinated in real life, but so to learn about this conspiracy was pretty exciting. So how does the game play? So every player you have your conspirator, and you have 2 main stats on your card. You have suspicion and you have motivation. Motivation is probably the thing that drives the game, because motivation is what allows you to unlock the special abilities in your cards. You don't just get special abilities. You have to get yourself hyped up and motivated in order to be able to do whatever special thing that is done. You also can increase your hand size. So the hand is pretty important in this game. If you're going to be drawing from a resource deck, and the resource deck has little powers that you can do around the board, but it also has these plot cards. So the plot cards is how you win the game. The plot is basically like, okay, I'm going to assassinate Hitler by using this plot, and it's a thing that you carry in your hand. So you need to build up to that. You need to have certain prerequisites. You have to need a level of motivation. You don't need, but it helps to have your suspicion low, which is your other stat. Your suspicion isn't a positive stat. Like it's basically something you just want low. So there's certain events in the game, and I'll get into the actual game mechanics in a second, but you can get arrested in the game if you have too high a suspicion. If you're going to execute one of these plots to assassinate Hitler, it's suspicion. Having high suspicion really hinders you because it increases Hitler's military strength. Obviously, if you're under a lot of suspicion, it's going to be hard for you to get close enough to do the deed of assassinating Hitler. So the game board is a map of Europe with extra spaces representing Berlin. So it covers Poland, it covers, I think France is on the board, but it really, like, most of the map is centered on Berlin. And as you're playing, you're controlling pawns, and the pawns are going from space to space around the board. You also on the board are Hitler and I believe 5 of his close lieutenants, like Goebbels and, people that you've kind of recognize from history. You're going to be moving around the board. You're going to avoid these people. Obviously, you don't want to be in the same space as some of these people. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but you want to try to play some cat and mouse there too. You're going to be picking up stuff. Like at every space, there's some sort of like item, and you're going to want to deliver these things to other spaces. So it begins with a pick up and deliver. You get your motivation up that way. You keep your suspicion low that way, just kind of, ducking and weaving for a little bit. And then as you get your motivation up, as you get the plot cards up, then the game kind of hits overdrive. So you're doing basically a lot of the same stuff as you would in a Pandemic or a Flashpoint Fire Rescue or these cooperative games. One thing that really distinguishes this game is the dice. The dice are done in a very interesting way. So one special action that you can take on your turn, which I haven't seen another board game, at least another cooperative game, do this, is you have 3 actions on a turn, but you can use 1 or 2 or 3 of these actions to roll dice. And that's like, like something bad can happen, like all the dice have a bad face, and if that is, then Hitler will get more military strength or something else bad will happen. But you can actually get 2 or 3 or 4 extra actions per dice. So you can pick up your dice, take 3 actions, use your 3 actions, roll, and then end up with like 9 actions or 6 actions or whatever it is. And now all of a sudden you have the whole board to yourself, so which is really exciting. I've like I said, I've yet to see a cooperative game really play with the action economy like that in such a random way. And I was reading a designer diary. Part of why they introduced this mechanic is to limit alpha player. So a lot of cooperative games struggle with alpha player, but in a game like this where action economy is kind of variable, at least you can't really say to somebody, "Oh no, don't roll the dice now," because if they roll the dice, it might be great. So that person can say, no, back off, dude. I want to try this, and this could be great. So that was kind of cool. I like the way the game implemented that. So that's what you're doing. You're at the beginning of the game is really kind of tame. You're just picking up items, and the items are like, keys and, these little items, delivering them, keeping your suspicion low, getting your motivation up. And eventually you're building up to try to execute this plot card. And that's pretty exciting. The plot card, you roll. And that's what it is. It's a roll. I can't really sugarcoat that. A lot of dice rolling in this game. And you can buff your roll depending on you fulfill these extra conditions. So like you have high motivation, Hitler is at a certain space, you're at a certain space, and you have these other items. You can roll a lot of dice. It's kind of how you do it. And either you succeed or you fail. And that's basically the whole game. Before I get into my positives, I know, Dr. Rael, you've played this, and I think you had a really good opinion of this game.
I did. I enjoyed it. I played it only once. I was Bonhoeffer, the guy who came up with that line of first they came for the communists and I was not a communist. And I just felt a really strong connection with this game. You inhabit your character. I think you're absolutely right about the game dealing with the alpha player problem very well. Everything is very tense and very hairy. But it's a beautiful design for a cooperative. It's a great theme for a cooperative. one of you is getting strong and getting worked up while the other one just got crushed. And it feels like even if you're reloading, somebody else is doing something interesting. So you always remain engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of other stuff going on to the game. There's like card draw and there's event decks and all kind of, I really didn't want to burden the description too much. There's a lot to the game, but I just kind of try to focus on player actions. But yeah, I really liked, at first I was kind of like, dice rolling. I don't like that much dice rolling. The game takes about an hour to play through and you have to take time to build up. I don't love when there's a lot of dice in this game, but I love that mechanic. I forget exactly what it's called. I think it's like the Conspire mechanic or something where you can roll for extra actions. I love that. I love that they thought of the alpha player problem and they dealt with it in a way that made the game more fun. Some games they're like, they do it with like hidden information. It's like, okay, you can't be alpha gamer because you don't know all the information. Some games that work, some games that really doesn't. I like that this game didn't really go that route. It found another way to combat that, which is really, really fun. The history of the game is pretty cool. So like you said, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which is a personal favorite of mine because I've actually read a couple of his books back in theology school a lifetime ago. Really, really inspiring. And some of the other people there. The event cards that come out, there's all sorts of stuff, but it's historical, but it's kind of in this historical pulpy way. Right. So this isn't history. Like we're not, Hitler was not assassinated in real life. But it introduces those things, but it makes it does in a really exciting way, which I really, really liked about this game. The one thing I will say kind of, against the game, and I think a lot of people point this out, there is way too much luck, especially when it comes to executing the plot card. So it really comes down to a dice roll, and the game clearly does it on purpose. They want to build that tension. And I've heard people defend it like, this is how to simulate real life, fog of war. Who knew if the people that can succeed, not succeed, dice rolls kind of emulate that. To me, as a gamer, if I'm going to spend an hour doing something, I'm going to spend a whole bunch of time doing something. I know, Anthony, only I'm over here complaining about an hour being long, and you just played Churchill, which took you like a million years. But it's to spend that much time building up, and for it to all come down to a die roll. That wasn't, I wish they could have made a better choice with that. And I know that's only one thing, but it's the thing. You don't either you make that roll and the game's over, and this game could end like if you get a really juicy plot card, you're just kind of in position to it. It could end in like 15 minutes, or you could be there for an hour and a half slogging through the very last events and praying to God that something happens. And that very old school kind of design, it kind of detracts. I really enjoyed the game, but I definitely recommend it, but I have to put it out there because I know a lot of gamers who like, they like the solo for the puzzle of it. That's not going to fly for them. Along with this being, kind of a theme that, you're assassinating Hitler. And whenever you say the word Hitler, it kind of sets off alarm bells for people. And we'll get into that after the jump. So, I give this game a recommendation. I definitely recommend playing it, checking it out. And I like the fact that it's doing some risky stuff, a really, different thing. As Dr. Rael said, the theme is very, it's very exciting. It's very tense. So that's Black Orchestra. Now, now let's talk about the themes, right? So I think we're in agreement, Dr. Rael, where Black Orchestra does a lot to be respectful, right, of the source material. So it is this kind of pulpy adventure feel, but at the same time, there's, it doesn't like, go do liberties with, the different historical figures. The event cards are pretty, solid to history, and it makes you kind of like what Anthony was talking about with Churchill. It's done in a way where it kind of makes you want to learn more. So is that what you found in the game?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that aspect of history, but it certainly feels that way. And I think the critical thing is the setup. The basic architecture of the game is beautiful. You're working together to assassinate the most evil person who ever lived. How can that? You can't be on the wrong side of history, no matter what, in this game. So it makes for a perfect cooperative. And it also does its work with a difficult theme by asking players not to identify with with historical atrocities, but to be fighting them in the same way that Freedom does, which we were talking about last week, the game about the Underground Railroad and freeing slaves. In both games, players get to play good people trying to do good things.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I read another, I think it's a 2-part series called Fascinating Fascism that you put on your blog, which is the Ludica blog. In case you did not listen to part 1, go check that out over on BGG, Ludica. And you talk about a game that doesn't put you on the make you identify with historical atrocities. You talk about Secret Hitler,
which is almost the opposite of this game, if it's possible to imagine in every respect. So Secret Hitler is in terms of its mechanics, is a beautiful social deduction game. It's people argue about this, but it's up there with the Resistance and Avalon. Some people prefer one system over another, but that was the intention of the designers. I think that Secret Hitler came from some of the same folks who gave us Cards Against Humanity. So that gives you kind of a sense of their perspective. And they built a beautiful social deduction game, but they did it without a theme in mind. And so they pasted one on at the end, and the theme they chose was, you're trying to find Hitler. And there's a couple problems with that. One is that it's enormously ahistorical, because in the game, the strategy hints actually direct you to, if you are Hitler, try to look as liberal as possible and vote with liberal policies. And that, in fact, is a strategy that works, but has no relation to the actual Hitler, who never really tried to hide who or what he was or what they were going for. So that's a problem. And then the other problem is simply some people don't want to play Hitler. Some people don't want to wind up with that role. That's happened in our group a couple times, and I have to say that I don't particularly relish drawing that card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Apologies. We have a super fan, one of my good friends, Adrian Falcone. Sorry, we're gonna rag on Secret Hitler a little bit. I know you like that game, but in the crosshairs right now.
It plays great. It's just made a theming choice that I think sort of predictably was going to create some challenges. But that's also part of what got it attention. One of the designers, I think they're pretty good at sort of playing the media game on this. So one of the designers sent copies of the game to I think all the U.S. senators, and attached this with a warning that in our present political climate, we're in running the same risks that are there in the game. So a very provocative media campaign that got this game a lot of attention.
So, Anthony, have you had a chance to play Secret Hitler?
I have not. I do not generally enjoy social deduction games, and then combine that with the Hitler theme, and I was like, nah.
So actually, that's a good question, right? Why not? Just like what is this kind of a bridge too far for you to mix metaphors?
Yeah, I mean, if I play a social deduction game, it's usually just because I'm appeasing other people. I don't really want to. There's other fillers I would enjoy more. In this case, it gives me an excuse to be like, oh, I don't really want to play that because, theme. I don't know that I necessarily where I'd come down on the theme. It seems kind of like tacked on, as you said. And so I can't say I'm offended by it necessarily because I don't really know what's going on there. It seems random and not necessary, but at the same time, I don't know. It's just not a game I wanted to play. It's Yeah, I find it interesting that we're at a stage now where you can just tack this on without really thinking about what it means or how it might affect certain people to see that in a game. I'm not like deeply upset by the idea of it or being presented with it. I just don't want to play. I would just avoid it. But I know people who would be, and it makes you think like, do we really want to put people in that position and make them that uncomfortable by bringing this game to the table?
So here's my question, right? And I'm really eager to get both your guys' perspectives. So last week we talked about how games kind of appropriate these different perspectives, and it's better if the game is good, and all that kind of stuff. And we celebrated games that kind of open the door to different ways of looking at things. So this is almost kind of on the other side, right? Where this is a theme that's like intentionally provocative. And there's a lot of people who argue that games like this, and it doesn't have to be Secret Hitler. It could be any game. It could be like a Euro where you're in Nazi Germany and you are, figuring out the most optimal ways to, lay tracks down between Auschwitz and all those other different places. It's like horrifying to think about, but there are some people that would argue that even a game like that belongs in our society because, hey, look, if you don't like it, don't play it. Right. Any game should be made. Any game should have the freedom to be made and just play something else if you don't like it. So I wanted to see, because you get that argument a lot. And when you get to the boards, that's just like a way to kind of, people come down, shut down a conversation that way, or they kind of, just make the point strongly. I just wanted to see what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, the argument that, well, it's only a game always fell a little flat to me, because oftentimes the theme that one person finds troublesome is actually the draw for another person. There's this notion that games are sort of trivial entities, which I think is a suspect notion, but that's what's out there. That's the justification that's frequently hauled out by people who are defending challenging themes like this. That, well, it's just a game, so it doesn't really matter. And that, of course, flies in the face of a lot of things that we've learned about the way stereotype and prejudice works in popular culture. Very often, in its day, instances of bias and stereotype are most commonly thought of as being latent, as not being there. In the first days of blackface minstrelsy in the United States, people didn't shriek that it was racist. They sort of accepted it as it is. And what we've learned is that the way that racism and sexism and other things like this work is that they're sort of latently reinforced throughout our culture by a lot of different kinds of means. And games, as part of our popular culture, are clearly something that can do that. And you can look at old board games from the early 20th century or the 19th century and watch that process, watch gender norms being reinforced in games and things like that. So I don't think it'll work to say that it doesn't matter because it's just a game. Games are important cultural products that do important cultural work.
So then what can we retheme it? Like, I've seen people, it's now Secret Dictator. Don't worry about Hitler. Or
Secret Sith. I think this is the Emperor in Star Wars is far better. Or I don't know, theme it around Mean Girls with high school cliques or whatever. There's got to be something you can do with it. I think that the Secret Hitler folks actually, or some of them actually, sort of delighted that in the provocative nature of this because it drew attention. But I think that's kind of a wasted opportunity. Jason, you were talking about a different kind of game about Nazi Germany, and you were talking about laying tracks to concentration camps. There's another game out there that is where if Secret Hitler is sort of pointlessly provocative, Train by Brenda Romero, which is I think made in 2006, is pointfully provocative. She's really trying to make a powerful point with that game. And that's a game where there's only one copy exists, and so it's not available for public consumption. You have to mostly read about it. but it's a game that you start playing, and you are initially just doing something that seems pretty Eurogamey. You're trying to move people on boxcars across the countryside, and only as the game goes on is it revealed to you why you are doing that, and you are in fact trying to set up the most efficient transportation machinery to get to Auschwitz. And you have this horrible, startling moment where you realize that in playing a game, you have become complicit with this incredibly horrible act. It's a very powerful experience, but it's not, a game that you would haul out on weekend game days. Of course, it's a piece of art, or at least that's how Romero presents it.
If what was it, Tramways we reviewed like a month or two ago, Anthony? If the Tramways had that going on, how would you feel?
Very uncomfortable.
Yeah, like so basically is like what are the lines? Like that's what we're talking about, right? Go ahead.
And those lines are going to be to a certain degree individual, right? That's good. There's a lot of stuff out there, and we don't all have to consume it all. We don't have to endorse or appreciate it all. There are clearly some games, though, that are enormously troublesome. And in the history of board games, there are such games. In the 1930s, a game appeared called Juden Raus, which is translated as Jews Out, where you are trying to move markers that represent Jews portrayed in stereotyped form and moving them out of the German state. You're trying to cleanse the state of the Jews. And at the time, this was a piece of pro-Nazi propaganda, although the Nazi state actually discounted it using the interesting reasoning that as a game, it trivialized its subject, which was too important to be represented in a game. So you have that discourse of games as trivial entities again. But even so, this is an evil game. If there is such a thing, this would be an evil game, and no one could play that. Even if you were playing it now, simply to try to understand something about the culture of interwar Germany, you couldn't do it innocently. You would have to be aware of the weight of social issues on you while you were playing that game.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you kind of made that, because there's a spectrum, right? We're talking about where the line is different for different people. Clearly, a game called Jews Out crosses a line for vast majority of people, and that we can agree on that. So, but does Secret Hitler cross a line, right? So for me, the reason why it crosses the line for me is that in American history, right, we have a very long tradition of Holocaust denial. So even as the you had the boat, during the war, you had the boat that came over, and the U.S. kind of famously turned it back. The boat full of Jews, they came back, and a lot of them went back to concentration camps. Even after the war was over, Dwight Eisenhower, who was the Allied commander, he was in the field, and he kind of knew from his commanders that they wouldn't believe it, and America in general kind of wouldn't believe it. I know this is an American centric discussion. I apologize to our EU listeners, but I think maybe you find some parallels here as well. So Dwight Eisenhower, he visited the concentration camps, and he made sure to do it eyewitness, and he made sure to document his visits, because it's documented. He just had the general sense that people won't believe the scope of this, and that this was possible. So I don't know if you guys, I'm sure Dr. Rael, you probably know all about this, but the Diary of Anne Frank, I read that when I was in school. So the Diary of Anne Frank, for those who don't know, it's a story of a girl, Jewish girl whose family fled to the Netherlands, and she kind of kept a journal. She was encouraged to keep a journal because people didn't know what was going on, so she was kind of in hiding and everything. So for the most part, it's it was kind of a love story. I didn't like reading it when I was a kid, but there's definitely the specter of what was going on. And then they take that and they make it into a play. and then they take the play and they make it into a movie. And as it shifts into these different media, the presence of the Nazis, the Gestapo, kind of diminishes to the point where it's this almost like faceless, it might as well be a Sith Lord out there.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the drama becomes about her own personal struggles and the hopes and all that dreams. I'm not discounting that at all, but it's noteworthy that the filter in our society is to take this very difficult and very real thing, and if not outright deny it, then to minimize it. And what Secret Hitler is participating in is this kind of like trivializing impulse, right? It's right there. Like what you described, you have a terrible word for it, but it's a great concept. Ludmeria.
Yeah.
Ludmeria.
It's like the discourse around a game, the conversation around it, how it's understood by people.
Right. The cult, like I understood it as like the cultural context of the game. I see a game like Secret Hitler, or I see games like, certain, not the whole Cards Against Humanity. I think Cards Against Humanity is problematic for other reasons, but like there's certain ones that they generate an aura that becomes problematic given the bigger cultural context of where it's at. Right. Yeah. So Secret Hitler on its own, whatever, it's a social deduction game. People have fun with it. One of my great friends up in Connecticut runs games of it. It's, you tell me it's a great game. That's fine. But it rubs up against this tradition that I see in American culture, and that, a number of my friends see, that's a problem. That's a big problem. And I think that, the instinct to like, oh, well, just don't play it. Well, it's like smoking in a theater, right? You could say, oh, just don't smoke. But that person is smoking in the theater, and the smoke is in the theater. It's affecting just the atmosphere.
Exactly. It's not just one person's issue. It's what the smoking or the game is doing collectively that matters here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that game shouldn't exist. Yeah. I'm just saying like, okay, we're talking about lines, right? And so the lines for me will generally revolve around a game's Ludmeria. Where is this game? What is this game triggering for other people, and what are the intentions behind it? So a game like Black Orchestra also has a very strong Ludmeria because people react strongly to Hitler, right? Hitler, Nazis, like they just hear that thing, but the way it kind of approaches that, it interacts with its culture is fun, exciting. And if that's too strong a thing for you, then that's something you probably kind of want to avoid. But I don't think it's like carcinogenic, right, in the game space where a game like Secret Hitler, because of its interaction with this tendency to minimize or soft deny or whatever you want to call it, the Holocaust, is a little bit problematic.
Yeah, the problem is rarely in whether something is represented. It's usually in how it's represented. So Black Orchestra does this great job of drawing you into a historical challenge that is incredibly difficult and very tense, filled with tension, and you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to off an evil person. So it's in the how, and there's something about Secret Hitler that just feels way too disrespectful of the magnitude and the enormity of the historical thing that it claims to represent. That's where the slippage is in that game. But we're also talking about games, and I think that I'm somebody who has spent a quarter century teaching about race and racism, and I'm as concerned about those issues as anybody else. But it is possible to bring a kind of a policing mentality that I think ultimately won't really work. Like if we said that, darn it, a game that represents Nazis in this way or that represents slavery in a certain way, it just should not be made. there's a kind of futility to that because it just doesn't mean those games won't be made, and in fact, it enhances the taboo quality of making them.
It makes it more likely that it'll make a lot of money on Kickstarter.
Yeah. So there's something about the fact that these are games. The same things happens in comedy and around African American comedy. What crosses the line? What is, edgy is fun, but edgy can also drive you right over the line and make you not want to see something anymore. It's in the nature of these things, whether it's comedy or games or play of any sort, to be walking that edge. That's part of what attracts us to these things, I think.
So, like, Anthony, what are your like personal lines? Like, have you ever encountered games? Like, obviously, there's some games that are like up beyond the pale, and most games are like safe. But have you ever encountered games that are like right in the middle where you're just kind of like, eh?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, and I think I don't know. It's hard. I mean, it comes up in a lot of situations where you're either replicating actions of something that you're not really comfortable with, like we talked about last week in those games and the representations of slavery, or it's something as simple as playing as the Germans in a World War II board game or something, which I don't really necessarily have a problem with, but it always gives me a second of pause, especially in a game I haven't played before. I'm like, is this done well? Am I comfortable with this? It's not sensationalized. It's not, is this Call of Duty, the board game? I'm not going to dive headfirst into something that's completely tone deaf on the topic. Mm-hmm. So I do always pause. I can't think of any games off the top of my head, other than some of the ones we've been talking about, that have made me uncomfortable or give me further pause. But it's definitely something I try to think about. And I'll be not necessarily uncomfortable to start, but wary if a theme looks like it's questionable or pushing the boundaries a little bit, at least until I get a sense of how well it does it,
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about that idea of like the game is just a game, don't take things so seriously, all these games should be allowed to exist and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that at all. I think these are social things. Board games are social, except in our situation. Sometimes they're not. We play them at home. It's fine. But you're putting it out there. It's not like something you're playing by yourself all the time. You're putting it out there. There's other people involved. You're sharing it with people. You're playing it in public a lot of the time.
You're posting on Facebook.
Yeah, you're putting pictures up. You're talking about it. That means it's not just a game. It's part of a larger conversation. And you're pulling other people into that conversation, whether they're comfortable with it or not. So I think if a game goes far enough over that line, it's not fair to say, it's just a game, because there's someone in the room, whether they decide to play or not, there's someone in that room who's like, this is not okay. And now you've made that person uncomfortable, but not even that's not even really the main issue. It's the fact that, you're putting these ideas out there and people are normalizing to them or ignoring their own misgivings or just, powering through for social reasons. That one person, maybe there's one person who says, I don't want to play Secret Hitler because of XYZ. There's probably 2 or 3 more people sitting there going like, I don't know, but they're still going to play because it's a social experience. And that's not a cool thing to do to people, in my opinion. That's my biggest problem with that game, from a social perspective, beyond the subject matter and everything we've been talking about here. So yeah, I mean, I think saying it's just a game is really not. It's not fair to the other people you're playing with, but it's certainly not fair to the subject matter.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of it has to do with how engaged you are in these cultural things. So I happen to know about like the tradition of American Holocaust denial. That's not like common knowledge. You're not going to read that on the front page of the Times every day or whatever it is. That's something that is, for whatever reason, it kind of stuck with me. So that's kind of contributes to my line in terms of why Secret Hitler is problematic. I definitely I want to respect the fact that there's a lot of gamers out there that they feel that they don't want to be shut down, right? Because you can go too far with this stuff. You can go we talked about politically correct last time. Like they don't want to be shut down. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. So at the end of the day, I guess, fine, like make the game that you're going to make. It inspired this conversation, which I think is a positive conversation. But at the same time, I would hope that I don't want to just keep having this conversation. I would like a situation where someone puts out something provocative, and then a conversation happens, and then something like awareness gets moved forward. The culture actually changes, as opposed to kind of this toilet bowl swirling where things just keep up and we go in these circles. We don't really get anywhere. So I don't know. I
think you're helping that process out. These are exactly the kinds of discussions that multiply and wind up influencing game designers and what they choose to cover. Games you can make mechanics represent just about anything, and games are always teaching, whether they think they are or not. So just imagine some of the possibilities. Like if Secret Hitler, the power of that, the sort of the fraught quality of that game shows us how powerful games can be. Imagine taking on some of the topics that modern games are taking on, like GMT's Coin series has their game about Afghanistan, their games about terrorism. You could make historically based games that look at the experience of U.S.-Japanese internment during World War II, or Belgium and the Congo and the experience of colonialism. You can represent just about anything you want in games from any perspective you want if you try hard enough.
And I think that's a really great place to stop. Just the idea that, we talked about this last time too, but like gaming is learning. A game is always teaching. It is always, even if it's reinforcing, that's still teaching, So, I think that's kind of the where I would want this conversation to go, is not for people to stop making games, but for people to make more games with different perspectives, where the provocative game can be out there, and then the Black Orchestra type game where it's like, it's a good game and it brings you into a space that's difficult, but it does it in kind of a respectful way. So like games like Freedom, Comancheria, Black Orchestra, they get bumps for me. They might not be the best games as mechanical experiences, but I love the fact that they put us in a different space, and we learn different perspectives, and we have more kind of a headspace in order to be able to challenge stuff and recognize stuff that might be problematic when we see it, way more than we could have before. And a lot of gamers, they don't want to even enter that cultural space, which is why we kind of did the division in the episodes, where they just want to learn the games. That's great. I don't want to force this conversation on anybody, but at least some gamers are having it, and hopefully this was a kind of a benign enough conversation in terms of like or not benign, but like an engaging enough conversation where people aren't kind of put off and they're willing to engage. So I think that's about it. We've had a great couple of episodes, long ones, but I think the topics and the games and all that stuff warrants that. Thank you so much, Dr. Rael, for coming on the podcast.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you both.
All right, guys, that's going to go ahead and be everything for this week's episode of Every Night is Game Night. Guys, if you haven't had a chance yet, check us out on Facebook. The Board Gamers Anonymous page is growing rapidly. Having some great conversations there with a lot of you, as well as the Board Gamers Anonymous listeners. You can catch us on Twitter at ENGN_podcast. Also have the guild on Board Game Geek 1735. If you have not yet, check out BoardGamersAnonymous.com. You'll find all of these episodes and the show notes for everything, including this interview. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we'd really appreciate it. Stop on by, leave a quick review on iTunes. 5 stars goes a long way, helps more people find the podcast, shows us that you're listening, but also helps introduce solo games to more people. So that's going to go ahead and be everything for this week. So until next week, grab a solo game off the shelf and let's make every night game night.
Later, everybody.